My name is Sharon Gill. I'm an associate professor in biological sciences. My main research interest is to understand how animals respond to human-induced environmental change. So it's a really broad kind of question. So our specific question looks at how animals communicate in noisy conditions. So my interest in this research began really early on with a love of animals, and I wanted to have a career where I studied animals, and I didn't want to be a vet, but I knew I liked being out in nature and figuring out what animals did in their daily lives. So it started with that interest, and then the building concern with thinking about how the environment was changing and how that might affect animal populations. So it's been a long kind of journey towards this specific question that we are addressing now, but it's really been motivated by this love of animals and wanting to understand what it is that they do and how they make their living out in nature, and then how we might be affecting that by how we're changing the environment, whether that's in regards to light or noise or climate change. The goal is really to think about that in terms of the behavior in terms of a conservation implication. The big part for the animals themselves is that those sounds that they make have a specific purpose, and they use those calls and songs for breeding. So without those songs, they can't breed successfully. So it's a really important part of their daily lives to be able to sing and to advertise and to call for mates. Our concern is to explore how then noise might affect their ability to use those calls that have a really, really important function, right? They have to use those to define their space that they use for breeding, to attract a mate. And if noise affects those things, then they could, as individuals, have low reproductive success. They might not breed successfully. That translates into potentially a population problem. So if individuals within a population can't attract mates, they can't breed successfully, or they breed less well, then that might mean that the population starts to decline. So in terms of kind of connecting what goes on at the individual level, how they might approach or solve the problem of communication and noise, really we can then start to weave that into thinking about populations and how they might persist over time in noisy environments. So it really is all tied up with conservation of those species in nature. The other part of it is that just like the canary in the coal mine, birds and animals in nature that are singing and might be compromised by noise kind of are a bellwether for us. We go to those same places that these animals are, and we go for an enjoyment of nature, but if they're not there, then we will suffer as well. So I think our work has kind of broader implications for our enjoyment of nature and the peace that we get from enjoying nature. Yeah, so in terms of our history, if you can think about the sounds that we used to make, hundreds and hundreds of years ago, the earliest kind of broadcast sounds that humans made probably were church bells that were used, to organize society in small towns and cities, and those were intermittent sounds that punctuated the sound environment, but they weren't constant, persistent sounds. Those constant, persistent sounds developed with the Industrial Revolution, right? That's where we got mechanization, and we got the ability to have work all the time, to have that constant hum that became so prevalent in our societies that we actually started forgetting that it even existed. I've noticed for myself that once I've started studying noise, I can't stop hearing it. And so I'm much more aware of it being present now than I used to be before I ever started working on this question. So it's a relatively recent phenomenon, right? 150 years or so ago that we started really changing our sound environment. I'm not sure that we have current clear solutions for that. These are complex questions because there's many different sources of noise that we generate from our traffic, building construction, building noise, oil well compressors. There's lots of different sources of noise, so the solution to these are pretty complex. In terms of what we might know from the past that could inform us about how animals respond to noise, we actually do have some interesting parallels, but with the natural world. Animals do have to deal with noise a lot. They have to deal with the noise from wind, the noise from rain. If they're on the shore, they have to deal with the noise of wave action. These are all natural sources of noise in the environment that animals do have to respond to. So they might adjust the time at which they sing or call. So if it's a particularly windy day or there's a lot of rain, they're not out there singing and calling in the same way. So it might be not unexpected then that animals can respond to human generated sounds as well. And so we could use that as kind of that response to the natural sounds to inform us about maybe how they might respond to natural sounds or anthropogenic sounds, human-induced sounds. So I haven't been in contact with community organizations to think about the implications of our work to them, but I do work with the Southwest Michigan Land Conservancy on a whole other area of research where we are interested in understanding the whole sound environment. So not just the animals, but the human sounds, the wind, those sounds, wind and rain. And part of that work is to understand what is going on in terms of the sound environment on these nature preserves, with an eye downstream to understand if there's noise issues at certain reserves, if we could come up with a solution to mitigate noise problems at reserves, because those sites are designed for the conservation of nature and the protection of nature for our enjoyment. So if noise is prevalent, then that could have an impact on the quality of those reserves in terms of that sound environment. So we have started a program where we're working with the Land Conservancy to try to address some of those issues on their preserves. When I think about our research, there's a whole lot that we, the students in my lab, bring to the table. We know a lot about birds. We worked with frogs and as well. We have that expertise in understanding their behavior and their singing behavior, where they should be found, how the breeding cycles and things like that. But there are a lot of things that we don't have the expertise in, and that's where we rely on others, and we collaborate with others to help us develop that perspective. So we've worked with sound experts, noise engineers. We work with a specific person, Koorosh Naghshineh, who's in engineering, who's a noise control engineer, to help us understand the sound environment. We work with Kathleen Baker in geography to develop understanding through what's around the reserve. She's a GIS expert. So, and then we have other research that's taking us away from the focus on noise, but thinking more broadly about environmental change, where we work with Maarten Vonhof and Catherine Doherty in biological sciences to explore the microbes and the parasites that are on birds across urbanization gradient. So all of those things are only possible through collaboration. We don't have the expertise to be able to draw on answer questions from all those perspectives. So collaboration's a really big part of what we do, and we really have a great team of collaborators that are professors here at Western. We also have a really great team of undergrads and graduate students that we work with, and without whom we couldn't advance our research, and we couldn't know as much about what is going on in nature as we do. So I have several students in my lab who are undertaking projects directly related to this question of how noise pollution affects bird song. I have undergrads that are doing projects that are exploring this same question. I could think back through all of my experiences being out in nature. I've worked in a lot of different places, and there are so many special things that I've experienced. I've been so lucky to go to all these great places. I've been to Churchill, Manitoba, right on Hudson's Bay. I've been to Panama, and I did a lot of research in Panama. And every one of those places has a gem of a memory that that does motivate me, and I feel really, really fortunate to have experienced, just amazing things through nature. I just can't imagine not having had these experiences in my life. If there's one that stands out, it's pretty hard to pick out the one, because I've been so rich with experiences because of the type of work that we do. So I think one of the important things that we could talk about, I guess, is some of the preliminary, well, not even preliminary results, but the results that we're getting from the work. What we're finding is that animals that we've studied have an ability to alter how they sing or how they communicate depending on the noise that they're experiencing. And that's pretty exciting, that one possible solution for these animals who are living in noisy areas is to change how they communicate. And we have evidence that that's what they're doing. The next step for us to link up that initial finding with the question of whether these animals will be able to persist in the future is to connect the changes that they make with how successful they are when they reproduce. And so we're working on addressing that big question right now in some of the work that we're doing. So we've had really exciting results in terms of these animals are able to change how they signal. We just have some unknowns that we're still pursuing to be able to get the full picture. Some of the other work that exists on this question suggests that not all species can adjust how they signal and how they communicate in noise. And so it's also going to be important to target some of those species to understand why they are not able to adjust how they communicate and how that might affect their reproductive success and then their persistence over time. So that's a big goal of ours as well. So we study a variety of animals. We've studied birds and frogs. Our work has suggested both. So we have a couple of species of birds that we've worked with, chipping sparrows and house wrens. These are very common species. They do really well in urban areas. And they seem to be successfully changing their signal. Again, how that translates to reproduction, and are they breeding as well as they could, that we don't know yet, and we're working on that. There are other species that we study, one in particular, it's called the field sparrow. They're showing regional declines over the Midwest. And so they're actually designated as a species of concern because of their declines. One possible reason for a decline could be that they are not able to deal with noise pollution and their reproduction is compromised because of that. We don't know that's the answer yet, but we're working on field sparrows in particular to try to see if we can't contribute something to that understanding of why they're declining on this regional scale. So that's ongoing. One of the other things that we've just started working on last year, and I have an undergrad who's doing an honors thesis on this, is to look at the combination of noise and light pollution. So we have, with our street lighting, we change the sky brightness around where we live. And you can see maps of the United States or of the world that show all of the cities of the earth, right? So that has a really big implication for animals because their daily rhythms are set by night and light and day cycles. So we want to understand if light and noise pollution, either one or the other or both, affect the onset of some of the daily cycles that animals show. So we've just started that work to kind of combine different sources of pollution that might be affecting animals.